everybody. So we're going to get right into the review. First things first, I'm going to go through all the features. We're going to be covering every button and every knob. I'm going to explain what that does. Right now, you're hearing my voice through my Avalon V5 pre running through this thing. I basically have my voice sent to a bus, and we're inserting this in the chain on the bus. So this way you can just hear in real time what I'm doing as I change the settings and press the buttons. But I will give you a proper shootout with some musical applications that'll give you a little bit more realistic understanding of what it can do in that sense. But for now, we'll just jump right into it. We're going to start from the bottom. So right now we are in. The cool thing is this unit actually has a hardware bypass, which means that if I have that engaged like it is right now, my voice is not passing through any of the circuitry or any of the transformers. It's literally just completely bypassing the hardware. And this is a really great opportunity, and not a lot of gear uses this these days, to really hear what just the circuitry alone is doing to the sound. And if you see here, I'll kick it in one more time, hold this down, and right away, I mean, it's a very subtle difference, but you can definitely notice a little bit more color. Just adds a little bit more of a warmer tone to whatever you're putting through it. This will probably be a lot more apparent when we're running music through it. At least it was for me. And it's just a nice color right off the bat. And then we can actually put the compression in. And already it's a little bit louder because I do have some makeup gain set here. All right, guys, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the patented thrust filter. Essentially, this is just a sidechain EQ, but it does have quite a bit more to it than that. We're going to get into that shortly. Sound on Sound has a really great article about it if you want to really get into depth on what's going on with it. But essentially, you have your high pass and low cut for the signal that's going into the detector circuit. And what that does is it allows the compressor, if you want, to focus less and be affected less by high energy, low frequency content. So this way you get an overall louder volume and the mid-range will be a little bit more present. And you don't get that audible pumping as much if you are using heavier compression settings, because the low end will tend to do that quite a bit, especially if you have a song with a lot of low end. So this way it'll still control the low end, but let everything through. So in that sense, it's your standard sidechain EQ. All right, guys, so now we're going to get into the first one. We're going to start with the loud setting. So again, with my voice, you're not going to hear this doing anything because it's, again, we don't have a lot of high energy, low frequency content coming through here, but we will do an example of that shortly. Essentially, the loud one is, as you can see, it's a slope, and this goes from 20 hertz all the way to 20K. And it's increasing at increments of plus 3 dB per octave, that entire slope. And that is basically the opposite of pink noise, which declines at minus 3 dB per octave. And with pink noise, as you know, you have equal energy per octave, which is pleasing to our ears. It's the reason why pink noise is just a more pleasing sound than white noise. And that spectral balance is essentially what this sidechain setting does. It gives equal energy for all the other frequencies, while again doing that job of not allowing the low frequency to dominate the compressor, the detector circuit. So it just adds a nice natural sounding effect that way. And I have tested it on some, again, higher low frequency content, and it definitely controls that, but it also doesn't seem to be affected by it. Like it is a pretty obvious thing as to what it's doing once you actually hear it. You end up getting a punchier sound is what I find, especially in the mid-range. That's what it is. And I think that's just because of the fact that those mid-range and higher range frequencies are actually able to determine what the compressor is doing rather than just the low end, and it gets to focus in more on it. Very interesting concept. All right, the next setting we're going to talk about is the medium. And this one's a little bit more specific, I would say. It's got a flat range from 200 hertz to 3K, and they use the same 3 dB per octave slope as the loud equalization curve, except the 3 dB per octave happens at the end of each of those. So anything lower than 200 and anything higher than 3K. So what this is doing is now reducing the mid-range's ability to control the compressor circuit. On the thrust for loud, again, we had that was limiting the low ranges to control it, and now this medium is limiting the mid-range to control it. But again, with the 3 dB per octave slope still being active below the 200 hertz, we still effectively have the low frequency not affecting the compressor detection circuit as much, except this time it'll actually have a higher sensitivity to the higher frequencies. So again, this will definitely add some punch, similar to how the loud setting did, except it'll just basically add the punch in a different place. And the third and final setting we have is just normal, and this is a completely flat sidechain equalization curve. So this actually wouldn't be doing anything and just has it on a normal setting. So that this means that you're adding no sidechain EQ to the compressor circuit. Next thing we're going to talk about is the knee, soft, medium, and hard, and some makeup gain here. So you can already hear quite a bit of compression. So this is soft, medium, hard knee, soft, medium, hard knee. And with the hard knee, it's actually quite musical. It's still not too intense with the pumping effect, but it's definitely noticeably more punchy. So we'll set that back to soft. Next thing I want to talk about is the type. This is actually my favorite feature on the entire compressor. It's amazing to me how they included this. So essentially we have feedback and feed forward. Feedback and feed forward literally just refer to where the detector circuit is in the compression unit. With feedback, you're actually getting the sound after the compression feeding the detector circuit. So it's actually feeding itself, hence the term feedback. Feed forward is we have the detector circuit on the input signal. So it's detecting what it needs to compress before the compression. And you're probably thinking, well, how does feedback manage to catch the transients? It still does, because the process is happening so fast. Electrons are moving so quickly that it doesn't matter at that point. But the feedback is definitely a more musical sounding compression. There's not as much pumping, and it's very unlikely to overcompress. And that's just because it's not going to be able to catch on the same surgical level all the transients right off the bat. It will allow some things to pass through. But again, in a sense, that is a lot more musical of a decision. And personally, I've tried both so far, and I much prefer the old style. There is times where I really just want to squash something, either to be creative with it or just to control it because it might be that intensely dynamic of a signal. But the new style, you can hear the pumping right away, because I have this really insane compression setting, and it's a lot more like, it sounds like compression. But old style, it really doesn't. It flattens everything out in a nice musical way, which is exactly how they describe it when you read about this feature on the API stuff. And that's basically the new and old style compression. Next thing I want to talk about is the makeup gain. Very simple. We have manual, which I've been using for now. And this literally is what it sounds like. You actually set the makeup gain yourself. Auto, it'll try to level match it as much as to the input signal as possible. And I would use that once in a while, but I usually prefer to use manual, just because, again, I might turn it up just a couple extra dB sometimes, or not want it quite as loud, vice versa. So I like to just have control personally over that. But if you're trying to get something quick and simple, the auto is a really great feature to have. And the last and final button is the meter. All right, and the first thing we have here is the output, second thing being the input. And all that is what's happening before and after the compressor, essentially. It's what the meter is going to show you before or after the compression. And as you can see, we're actually pretty much the same on both, because again, I have my makeup gain set as such. It's actually a little bit quieter on the input still, but again, that's usually what you want with compression, to get a little bit of extra volume out of things while controlling the dynamics. So we also have our gain reduction meter here. Right now we're hitting about -6 roughly. So I have that turned up somewhere in between that and +9. And that will lead me to the top. We'll make our way back down with the knobs. This is your gain reduction knob, your threshold, your attack, your ratio, and your release. Very standard stuff here. The ratio is pretty cool because you can hit infinity to 1. So of course, this being a stereo bus compressor, it can also be used as a limiter, which is why I think it's so powerful for mastering. And I find API is really great with making all their gear very applicable in a mastering setting, For example, they have their 5500 EQ, which allows you to step up or step down how much you want the equalization settings to affect the signal. You can do half of it or you can do a quarter. And that's very useful because when you're talking about a mastering setting, everything is very minute. Everything has to be very minimal so that you don't change the overall signal too much, because you're dealing with an entire mix now, not just individual instruments. And of course, you can do this as well with the 529. You have the ratio that could be basically a brick wall limiter, but at the same time, you have new and old style compression, old style being a lot more musical and somewhat transparent. And then you have your thrust setting. So with a combination of everything that's here, you really have a lot of powerful tools to shape the compression exactly the way you want it without over or underdoing it. And on top of that, being an API unit, everything just gets executed in such a musical way that it's going to sound pleasing just running through the unit as is. All right, guys, so that's the rundown of the unit now. I'm going to go ahead and play some tracks through this thing, and we're actually going to hear what this compression is doing in a more musical setting.